I'd like to welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Flint on this lovely first Sunday in June. My name is Kathy Frazee, and I'm happy to serve as worship associate today. So, you may be wondering what the Unitarian Universalist faith is all about. Unitarian Universalism is inclusive. Unitarian Universalism is welcoming to all, no matter what your income, race, sexuality, or educational level. Unitarian Universalism advocates for love, the quest for justice, and the use of reason. You may also be wondering what this specific congregation in Flint, or UUCF as we call it, is all about. I can answer that best by telling you what I am grateful for in this church. I am grateful that we accept people from all backgrounds and faith histories. I am grateful that we support each other as we question and continue our spiritual exploration. I am grateful that we can discuss issues and not always agree, and that happens sometimes, but still respect each other. I am grateful that we support and care for each other in times of need. I am grateful for the wonderful people who are members and friends of UUCF. And today, as we celebrate the legacy of the Unitarian Universalist faith, I am especially grateful for the members of this congregation who were here before us. Without them, UUCF might not be here and thriving as it is today. I am grateful for people like Jen Smith, Alden Nelson, Bill Genske, Hal Lawson, Virginia Jordan, Don Boyd, and Rita Short, just to name a few. If you would like more information about Unitarian Universalism or our congregation, please feel free to contact our ministers or our office, and that contact information can be found at uuflint.org. And now we have announcements. It is with great sadness that we announce the death of Ron Kruger. Ron passed away on Tuesday, June 1st. He was a member of our congregation for 20 years and very active in social justice. There will be visitation at Sharp's Funeral Home, the Miller Road Chapel, at 8138 Miller Road in in Swartz Creek next Saturday, June 12th from 1 to 4 p.m. and 6 to 8 p.m. Details about Ron's memorial service will be in our weekly or a special e-update. Do you want to have the right words when talking with people who are transgender and feel bad when you don't? Join our ministers online on Wednesday, June 16th at 6 p.m. for Kindred Conversations entitled Having the Right Words in a Non-Binary World. The Zoom link is in your weekly e-update newsletter. Please join us in the churchyard next Saturday, June 12th, to celebrate UUCF. Our yearly volunteer recognition event begins at noon. We hope that you can attend to help honor and thank this year's outstanding volunteer. We'll also kick off our 4090 Endowment campaign to celebrate the Endowment's 40th anniversary and the church's 90th anniversary. Please bring your own lunch and chair, and we'll have dessert for everyone. Also, there's an outdoor work party that same day in the morning. It starts at 9 a.m. Even if you can come and help for an hour or so, it'd be appreciated. Please bring a shovel or rake if possible. And we encourage you to join us for coffee hour on Sunday after the service at 11:30 a.m. on Zoom. The ID can be found on our website, on our Facebook page, or in the e-update. We will now begin our service with a prelude by Jennifer Howard. now if you have a chalice at home, we encourage you to get it out and light it with us. We gather to seek the light of reason, the comfort of kindness, the outreach of action, and the acceptance of our own goodness and potential. May these things be our inspiration and the source of our gratitude to our ancestors who tended the flame of love and truth and held it high. Now please join me in the sanctuary and at home by reciting our covenant together. Recognizing the richness of diversity, the beauty and wonder of shared worship, and the transforming power of love and service, we gather as a sacred, intentional community to freely seek knowledge and truth, to celebrate the fullness of life, and by our actions to increase goodness and justice.
Good morning. In the struggles we choose for ourselves, in the ways we move forward in our lives and bring our world forward with us, it is right to remember the names of those who gave us strength in this choice of living. It is right to name the power of hard lives well lived. We share a history with those lives. We belong to the same motion. They, too, were strengthened by what had gone before. They, too, were drawn on by the vision of what might come to be. Those who lived before us, who struggled for justice and suffered injustice before us, have not melted into the dust and have not disappeared. They are with us still. The lives they lived hold us steady.
Good morning. My name is Shawna Bell, and I'm the chair of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Flint Endowment Fund. This year marks the 40th anniversary of the UU Endowment Fund. To celebrate this anniversary, I'd like to highlight the history of the Endowment Fund. In 1959, with the passing of Florence Whaley Orrell, the UU Church of Flint became the beneficiary of her irrevocable trust. The trust agreement provided that 1/8 of all of her property remaining in the trust after the death of her son would go to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Flint. In 1981, the UU Church of Flint received $500,000. In the letter the church received regarding this gift, it simply stated that it was made in memory of her deceased husband, William Crapo Orrell, while an article that was published at the time said the gift was made in memory of her father-in-law, John Orrell. Florence Whaley Orrell was the adopted daughter of Robert and Mary Whaley. The Whaleys are well known in the Flint area. The Whaleys established the Whaley's Children's Center, the McFarland Home, and endowed many other organizations. Growing up with parents who were charitable givers certainly had an impact on Florence. Her generosity is well documented. But why did Florence Whaley Orrell make such a generous gift and choose the Unitarian Universalist Church of Flint as part of her legacy? I'm going to start with Florence's father-in-law, John Orrell. John Orrell was born in 1822 in England. His parents could not afford to send him to school, but he went to a Methodist Sunday school every Sunday for 6 hours. When he was older, he came to North America. He graduated from the Meadville Theological School in 1850 at the age of 28. He was ordained in Flint, Michigan in 1851 as a Christian, which in those days meant congregational minister. In 1855, he moved east and he served the congregational churches of Eastport, Maine and New Bedford, Massachusetts. In 1856, John married Mary Ann Crapo. Mary Ann Crapo was the daughter of Henry Crapo, who formerly was the mayor of Flint and later became the governor of Michigan. In 1857, John Orrell switched from a congregational to a Unitarian ministry, and he served as a minister in the First Parish Unitarian in Sandwich, Massachusetts, until 1861. Reverend Orrell moved south to teach recently freed slave children and was also a superintendent and a teacher at the James Island Free School in Providence, Rhode Island. In 1862, John Orrell returned to Flint, Michigan. Because of local opposition of his religious faith, John Orrell never served a church in Flint, but he did preach occasionally. John Orrell became a good businessman and was on the board of directors at the Genesee County Bank. Reverend John Orrell died suddenly in 1876 at the age of 54, leaving behind 3 daughters, the eldest, who was Flora, 18, and a son, William, who was only 8. His children were young when he died, yet his legacy of free thought, generosity, service, and dedication lived on through them. 3 of his 4 children grew up to be Unitarians. William Orrell was the youngest child of Reverend John Orrell. William married Florence Whaley in 1895, and like his father, he served on the board of directors at the Genesee County Bank. His first cousins were the Durants. In 1904, when Durant reorganized GM, John Orrell became one of the original stockholders of the stock subscription that brought Buick to Flint. William Orrell established the Buick operations in Detroit, started automobile retailing in Michigan for Buick and Chevrolet, and was the first sales manager of the new Chevrolet Motor Company. William was responsible for getting the Chevrolet corporate headquarters to stay in Michigan by securing the property at Woodward Avenue in Detroit. His legacy was being part of the creation of the automobile industry in Michigan, which has created so many jobs in Flint and the surrounding areas. In the early 1820s, William was in a car accident and he suffered serious injuries. He passed away in 1927, and his funeral services were presided over by a Unitarian minister. Part of the assets endowed to the UU Church of Flint by his wife included stocks in General Motors. As mentioned earlier, Flora was the oldest daughter of Reverend John Orrell, and she had a daughter named Mary Blackington. Mary Blackington joined the Unitarian Universalist Church in 1955. Her husband, Guy, helped to secure the land that our church currently sits on. Mary's daughter, Esther, was told by her father, Guy, that when Florence Whaley Orrell was writing her will, she asked Guy what Mary would most like done with the money. Guy said nothing would give her more pleasure than for you to endow the church that she loves so much, which was this Unitarian Universalist Church of Flint. Mary Blackington was on the board of this church in 1959 when the news of the forthcoming trust was received. She never publicly took credit for her part in receiving these funds, but she immediately started campaigning for expansion of our building. Over the years, the Endowment Fund has allowed our church to not only survive, but to thrive. In 1986, $427,000 of the endowment was used to add an addition onto our building, which includes this sanctuary, the church, the kitchen downstairs, and the fellowship hall. Endowment funds have allowed the church to purchase additional land, search for and secure new ministers, install playground equipment, parking lot pavement, roofing, air conditioning, carpeting, hot water heaters, and new windows. I would like to recognize bequests made to the endowment account over the years. Florence Whaley Orrell, in memory of her husband, William Orrell, and father-in-law, John Orrell. Rosemary Vaughn. Mary Honey. Chuck Coggins, Dorothy Nagrich, and Bill Jennings. In 2014, the Endowment Committee had a matching campaign which earned $25,000 from an anonymous donor and was matched by 64 additional donors. This included Raina Bick, David and Gloria Dunkel, Dave and Wynn Handworker, John Wholesome, Joan Heron, Paul and Cheryl Jordan, Chris Monk, Evelyn and Robert Newman, Jim Newtown, Howard and Tammy Schultz, Scott Stensis, John and Ruth Straw, and Charles Thomas. The endowment fund is dedicated to assuring the continued financial stability of our church and our religious presence in the Flint area, and it provides an opportunity for people to make a gift that can create a lasting legacy. I would like to invite everyone to the UU Church of Flint this Saturday, June 12th. We will celebrate the 90th anniversary of our church and the 40th anniversary of our endowment and kick off our 4090 campaign. We will discuss how we can assure the future of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Flint.
Unitarians and the Universalists have been around a long, long time. Many people, a lot like you, over a very long time, have put their backs and their money into holding up our idea of religion, and that it should be about love and justice and reason. And putting a good roof over people and their good ideas takes a lot of energy and commitment. And it takes a lot of fuel to keep our light of truth burning. Today's service is about 6 less well-known UUs who never let that flame go out. Itinerant preachers were quite common in the new country America and its territories. But it wasn't an easy occupation. Wandering ministers spreading the good news of their faith were at the mercy of the villagers and what they could provide for them. The preachers often endured stormy weather, no sustenance, and no shelter. As bad as that was, though, one Methodist preacher who was itinerant wrote that the worst evil were the Universalists. He was speaking specifically of his contemporaries, the Universalist preachers, Hosea Ballou and Nathaniel Stacy. Stacy was originally a protege of Ballou. Stacy never intended to be a preacher, and in fact wasn't even raised a Universalist, but a Congregationalist. But his parents were members of the very first Universalist church in America until they moved. But preachers would visit them in their new home when Stacy was a child, and he recalls that those strange preachers preached a strange doctrine. Back then, though, he was prone to terrible bouts of terror and depression at the thought of a potential punishment by an angry God. Well, then, the strange doctrine of universal salvation became somewhat of a comfort to him, and his fear eventually dissipated as he got to know one of those strange preachers, Hosea Ballou. Ballou instantly believed that Stacy was destined to be a minister. After all, Stacy had tried blacksmithing, school teaching, clerking, newspaper distributor, and even clockmaking. So one Sunday, Ballou claimed to Stacy to have an awful headache, and he forced Stacy to preach for him. Stacy, later claiming to feel like an ox being led to slaughter, had a very successful sermon and thus began his lifelong career. Although he noted afterwards that it was funny that he had heard no more of Ballou's headache. Eventually, Stacy admitted that he was never so happy as when he was proclaiming in the ears of man and defending, with all the efforts of his feeble talents, the great salvation. And it must have shown, because he was said to be one of the most passionate promoters of universalism at the time. Although Stacy did have a few pastorates in which he stayed several years, 22 years in one church and 5 as the minister of Ann Arbor, Michigan, he would always leave time for itinerant preaching. He was one of the first preachers to introduce universalism to New York, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. And although he found it to be what he called excessively fatiguing and often slept outside in inclement weather, traveled nearly impassable roads, went hungry, and supplemented his income with seasonal school teaching and once an ill-fated cheese-making scheme, Stacy was converting people to Universalism. In fact, he claimed that in New York alone, he grew the number of churches from 2 to 200. Some people say that number was slightly inflated. But one thing is most definitely true about Stacy. He said someone had to go out into the country to tell frightened people that there was an alternative to a wrathful God. How fortunate are we that he did? In his memoir, he put it this way: someone had to do it, or else there would be no Universalist societies or congregations. All this we did, and all this was necessary to be done in order to clear the ground and plant the seed, which now has come up and is producing a luxuriant crop.
The people stolen from Africa and brought to America by force were soon confronted with the white people's holy book, the Bible. When they learned what was in it, they quickly and correctly surmised that this Jesus of Nazareth it spoke of would not put up with their enslavement. And so it was with Frances Ellen Watkins Parker. She was born a free black woman in 1825 in Baltimore, Maryland. She wrote poetry and novels, became a Unitarian, and fought for the end of slavery and the vote for black men and the vote for all women. She wrote her first volume of poetry, Autumn Leaves, when she was just 20. She taught domestic science at Wilberforce University in Ohio. She was later hired as a traveling lecturer for the anti-slave societies of both Maine and Pennsylvania. She endured the hardships of the lecture circuit for over 10 years, crossing America again and again, sharing the same platform with Frederick Douglass, William Lloyd Garrison, Susan B. Anthony, and Sojourner Truth. She was not as famous as her company, but she used her fiery speeches to convince people that slavery was unchristian. It was something Jesus would have nothing to do with. Frances was a member of the Unitarian Church in Philadelphia, and like most Unitarians, she found it odd that so many Christians thought that slavery was fine, no problem. It was the irony, the outrage that people defended slavery using the Bible that fueled her tireless work as an abolitionist. When slavery ended, she turned her interest to women's rights, and in 1866, Harper spoke at the National Women's Rights Convention in New York. In her famous speech entitled, "We Are Bound Up Together," she showed that society is a tightly wrapped bundle you can't pull apart. And if white men trample on the weakest, they eventually corrupt their own souls and paralyze their own spiritual energies. In 1892, Frances wrote a novel entitled Shadows Uplifted that was likely the best-selling novel by a black author before the 20th century. In it, she has her character, Iola, ask her mother, "Are these people Christians who made these laws which are reducing us to slavery? If this is Christianity, I hate and despise it." Iola's mother responded, "I have not learned Christianity from them. I have learned it at the foot of the cross." In 2011, scholars gathered in Philadelphia to honor the 100th anniversary of Harper's death. The select panel of scholars concluded that Harper's ideas still provide a way and the right focus for the modern fight for racial equality. The legacy of Frances E.W. Harper lives on in many ways, and her words still speak to African Americans of freedoms yet to be won. In her poem about Eliza, a runaway slave, she wrote, "How say they that the lawless may torture and chase a woman whose crime is the hue of her face? How the depths of the forest may echo around with the shrieks of despair in the bay of the Hound."
When I told my father that I was going to become a UU minister, he said, "Fantastic! You could become president of the UUA." Such a notion would have been unthinkable if it hadn't been for women like Unitarian minister Mary Augusta Safford, or Queen Mary, as she was known. She helped light the way for 150 years of women ministers to follow her. She may have even foreshadowed the arrangement we have here in Flint when she said that men and women will work and confer together as equals in ministry. Thus, in its greater completeness, it will the more strongly appeal to all human beings. Although this minister, as a kid, only went as far as dressing up cats and officiating at their weddings, Mary Augusta Safford was preaching from a tree stump on her family's farm near the banks of the Mississippi River in Illinois in the late 19th century. Safford's father, both farmer and teacher, introduced her and her constant companion, the neighbor girl, Eleanor Gordon, to the world of biblical criticism, abolition, evolution, and women's independence. By their early 20s, Mary and Eleanor pledged that they would spend their lives together serving the world as a team, and they did. They started their first church in 1879, and a year later, Safford helped found the Iowa Sisterhood, a movement of pioneer Unitarian women ministers that encouraged and supported one another in the Western territories. It was sorely needed. Women were not allowed to enter Harvard University, and they couldn't get a church in the East without that degree. The American Unitarian Association desired westward expansion, but civilized male ministers weren't willing to go to the West, where the pay was less and the conditions were harsh. But the sisterhood members had primarily grown up there, and they knew the life. And they also proved that they possessed the religious fire needed to build and sustain churches there. And this was especially true of Queen Mary. She was an excellent preacher, a brilliant fundraiser, and was willing to mentor many up-and-coming female ministers. She organized no less than 7 churches during her career. Around 1900, Iowan Unitarians told the joke, "What do the Catholics and the Unitarians have in common?" They both worship the Virgin Mary. In her 76 years with Gordon at her side, Safford changed the very nature of what a church and a minister could be. First, living on the frontier, Mary saw churches as full-service organizations that should meet the spiritual, personal, social, and the educational need of its parishioners. Whatever the problem or the project, Mary approached it holistically. Second, Mary felt a special responsibility as a minister to help religious communities evolve together in what she called the spirit of love and happiness. That meant women were given the stature of full human beings. And she continued to do that work in churches and in politics when she entered the suffrage movement. While UU women today still do look for ways to have a successful career, a loving home for their exceptional children, maintain an exciting sex life, and have sparkling floors by using green products that come in 100% compostable containers, progress is still evident. Mary's efforts made a tremendous difference in her day, and they continue to influence the way that we see women, we see ministry, and we see women ministers today.
Everybody is wondering what and where they all came from. Everybody is worried about where they're gonna go when the whole thing's done. But no one knows for certain, so it's all the same to me. I think I'll just let the mystery be. Some say once you're gone forever, and some say you're gonna come back. Some say you rest in the arms of the Savior in sinful ways you lack. Some say that they're coming back in a garden, bunch of carrots and little sweet peas. I think I'll just let the mystery be. Some say you're going to a place called glory, and I ain't saying it ain't a fact. But I've heard I'm on the road to purgatory, and I don't like the sound of that. I believe in love and I live my life accordingly. I choose to let the mystery be. Everybody is wondering what and where they all came from. Everybody is worried about where you're gonna go when the whole thing's done. But no one knows for certain, so it's all the same to me. I'll just let the mystery be. Think I'll just let the mystery be.
You can tell when a person is truly on fire for their beliefs because they follow those beliefs even if they lead to great hardship. Born in Jamaica in 1875, Egbert Ethelred Brown could have been a successful minister in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, as was his father. But Ethelred Brown knew himself, and he knew he was a Unitarian. Never mind that the closest Unitarian church was thousands of miles away, never mind that. He knew he wanted to be a Unitarian minister and bring that faith to the people of Jamaica. He applied to and was accepted at the Unitarian Meadville Lombard School in Pennsylvania. He made his way there, but he no sooner arrived than he was deported as a contracted alien. Back in Jamaica, he saved up money for another attempt to go to America. He was just about to aboard the ship, and his father decided to not give his son the money he had promised to him. His hopes were again crushed. Such things might dissuade a person with less commitment, but not Egbert Ethelred Brown. He took a job as an accountant, and in a year he had enough money to get himself and his family to Pennsylvania. In 1912, he was finally an ordained minister, but it seems the easy part of his life was over. He was now the first black man to be ordained a Unitarian minister, but no American Unitarian congregation would have him. He returned to Jamaica to establish a Unitarianism among the people there. He worked for 8 years to establish a church, but the American Unitarian Association was of little help. There were very few black Unitarians in that time, and changing that was not a priority of Unitarian headquarters. To make ends meet, Ethelred worked with a Jamaican trade union movement to create support for civil and economic rights for blacks. His attempt to grow churches in Montego Bay or Kingston were never successful. So in 1919, Ethelred decided he would uproot his family again and go to New York City, where presumably a black Unitarian minister could do some good and make a living. He started the Harlem Community Church in 1920 because the Unitarian Association would not let him start a Unitarian church. It was very small, and he had to take a second job as an elevator operator for 6 years just to get by. His church did eventually become the Harlem Unitarian Church. It survived for 30 years, providing a forum for African Americans to voice their concerns and to practice their protests. Ethelred was in the thick of it, striving to do his part for black Americans by, as he put it, Christianizing Christianity. He died in 1956, and his church died soon after him. His church was gone, but nevertheless deemed a success by black Americans and scholars who realized it was a vital part of the Harlem Renaissance of the 20s and 30s. Near the end of his life, Brown admitted he and his family had paid a high cost for his dedication to his faith. He wrote, "We know it is a hard price to pay, but we thank God that we are willing to pay the price, if this is the price which loyalty to truth demands, believing that the day will come when real success will crown our efforts. In those days, we shall realize that the success attained at last is fully worth the price we paid." Most religions have just one holy book. Some have 2 or 3 at most. But Unitarian Universalists have a couple of 100 holy books, perhaps more. One of those holy books is by a guy named Wilbur. From the minute a student arrives at the Star King School for the Ministry, they start hearing about the Wilbur Rare Book Collection, about the Wilbur Reading Room, and about reading Wilbur for this or that class. Soon you start asking yourself, who in the heck is this guy with the unpretentious name Wilbur? It turns out that the only thing Earl Morris Wilbur did was rescue the entire history of the European Unitarians from the flames of World War II. And he did that after he had already finished a long career as a minister and president of a Unitarian divinity school. He did those things, it seems, just to get warmed up. When Wilbur was 65, he realized that nobody knew much about the Unitarians of 16th century Europe. He reasoned that they were our spiritual cousins, driven by the same beliefs as American Unitarians. And we needed to know that part of our legacy. Most of the scholars in Europe cared little about the history of the Unitarian heretics. That is why the story of the real Reformation in Europe was still hidden in long-forgotten, fragmentary records, buried in remote and seldom visited libraries. Bringing that history into the light would take something of a working knowledge of 9 different languages, ancient and modern. Obviously, if this precious history was to be uncovered, someone who really cared about it would have to do it, even if they were of retirement age. Earl Morris got himself a Guggenheim grant, no small task indeed. And then he set to work mastering the languages he would need in his years of research. Imagine sitting down to learn 16th century Polish and Hungarian at the age of 65. You have to have a lot of fire in you to even consider such a thing. In 1931, he set off for Europe and returned 3 years later with over 1,300 rare books. Many of the books came from libraries that later went up in flames during World War II. After returning from Europe in 1933, it took Wilbur nearly 20 years to complete both volumes of his Bible, The History of Unitarianism, Socinianism, and its antecedents, and The History of Unitarianism in Transylvania, England, and America. He saved the stories of the Socinians, driven from their homes in Poland by the thousands. He saved the stories of people imprisoned and left to die because they dared to think differently. He also saved the stories of people tortured and killed by people who wanted to protect their old-time religion. These early Unitarians could have saved their homes, their churches, their lives, if they had just said the right words to the religions in power. But they would not say those simple words, "I take it back," and betray their beliefs. And that was what Wilbur saved for us in one of our many Bibles.
A UU minister for 54 years, Dana McLean Greeley wrote, "I have listened to stories of heroism and peered into the depth of human nature and discovered how joy and sorrow and love and idealism and suffering and courage, like geological ages, have in a few years shaped the character of man and women, producing an amazing panorama of personality, of patience, perseverance, and aspiration, as magnificent as anything in the physical universe. Every time a spark from the lives of these men and women has kindled new understanding and new faith in my life." Greeley often spoke of how he admired others, but he was and continues to be an inspiration with his words and by his example to more people than I think he would have ever imagined. At his retirement, one of his former parishioners said, "Dana Greeley's life is his finest sermon." Everyone said that Dana was meant to be a minister. After all, he was a 5th-generation Unitarian, which is rare, and he was born at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning, his favorite time of day. He's most remembered for being the last president of the American Unitarian Association and, directly following the merger, the first president of the Unitarian Universalist Association. Greeley was comfortable around American presidents, foreign heads of state, and world-renowned scientists. He knew Martin Luther King, Albert Schweitzer, and JFK. He was once featured in Life magazine. And Jimmy Carter came to visit him when a foundation for peace and justice was established in his name to honor him shortly before he died of cancer in 1986. I quickly discovered that those names of people he knew and titles didn't mean much to Dana when I began working for the foundation and preaching in the pulpit that he once filled. Although he had been gone more than 12 years when I arrived, the foundation, the church, and even the town of Concord, Massachusetts, talked about that humble Dana as if he had just walked down the street, waving and smiling at anyone who passed by. He might have known people all over around the world, and people may have known him through the many organizations that he served. But in the Boston area, Dana was a beloved friend and minister. His extensive sermon transcripts have been especially influential in my own work. But perhaps what I remember most from the stories I heard from the congregants that we shared, although decades apart, was his affection for people and his genuine interest in their lives. I heard numerous times that what he would say after hearing anyone's news, and it didn't have to be big, it was daily things, Dana would respond, "Good for you. Good for you." It was his charming way of demonstrating his absolute interest and regard for you and his life. He was known as kind, compassionate, idealistic, optimistic, but with a very buoyant sense of humor. Globally, he worked tirelessly for the causes of social justice, religious freedom, and peace. But he truly believed that compassion and love could lead to a peaceful, tolerant, and just world if we just kept at it. But Dana did believe that it all started with the individual. He had the ultimate awe and respect and confidence in the worth and dignity of every single human being. He once preached, "A person is no lower than his or her highest ideal. We should judge ourselves by our potential, and that can set us on fire." Greeley, like all the other Unitarian Universalists that Jerry and I introduced this morning, were set on fire by faith. And they passed it on for the benefit of generations to come.
There are places I remember all my life, though some have changed, some forever, not for better. Some have gone and some remain. All these places have their moments with lovers and friends. I still can recall. Some are dead and some are living. In my life, I've loved them all. But of all these friends and lovers, for people and things that went before. I know I'll often stop and think about them. In my life, I love you more. No, I know I'll never lose affection for people and things that went before. I know I'll often stop and think about them. In my life, I love you more. In my life, I love you more.
Now we enter a time for generosity. We affirm the goodness of this world. We share our joy for life and stand on the side of love. We share our time, talent, and treasure to continue being a liberal presence in this community. You can share your abundance by going to uuflint.org and making a donation, or by sending a check to the church office.
Our closing words are from Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, someone you now maybe know a little bit better. Oh, sisters kind and loving, when your gifts to me shall tell of the hours swiftly passing, may I learn to use them well and write upon them records for the brighter world above, of a life endowed with power and transcribed with deeds of love.
And let us extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this light, flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.